welcome to the CG Pro podcast. This is episode 35 with Peter Hyoguchi with us, and I'm going to introduce him in a second. If you enjoy this evening, then please do follow us at becomecgpro.com or in our Facebook group. So it gives me great pleasure this evening to welcome Peter Hyoguchi. He is a filmmaker, storyteller, and also passionate about the virtual production revolution that's going on right now, and has done some really amazing pioneering work in the virtual production space. So I'm really excited to speak with Peter this evening. He's got a story filmmaking career and worked at some incredible places in the past, and has made a lot of his own features, which is really exciting. So yeah, Peter, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Of course, yeah. No, it's my pleasure, and we've got to hang out at some cool events and hang out together a little bit already. And yeah, we're both excited about what's going on at the moment today. You know, this kind of revolutionary time that we're in filmmaking, using real-time tools. I want to take a second though before we get stuck into the future and all of that good stuff, and just take a couple steps back to the beginning of your journey and ask you about how you got started. I know you've been a filmmaker and interested in filmmaking since you were a kid, which is it's kind of rare for somebody to get what they're meant to be doing so young, but you did, and I'm curious as to kind of what steered you, what early inspirations you had, and kind of how you got going.
Yeah, I started filmmaking as a kid. Yeah, my mom was an animator. She was. I was born in LA. I was born in Hollywood, and my mom worked as an animator. She was an in-betweener and an ink and painter at Hanna-Barbera Studios in LA. And she worked on Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones, and she did commercials. She did the Kool-Aid Man commercials where he'd like bust through the wall and say, "Oh yeah." She hand drew, rotoscoped the face saying, "Oh yeah." And yeah, she did a lot of stuff for that studio. And I loved cartoons when I was a kid. And
did you appreciate then like how cool that was at the time? Do you think your mom was really cool when you were a kid?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was so cool to be watching cartoons and then to know that my mom, like, I watched Scooby-Doo and I thought it was cool, and then she would like draw Scooby-Doo or Shaggy or any of the characters that I wanted, and she would draw like characters on my hand so I could take them with me, you know. Right. And so it was like I had a lot of questions. I wanted to understand how they were made, and my mom and I were very similar in that we were passionate about art, and so she had a studio. She was also a fine artist, so she had a studio in the house that was her art studio, and then I wanted my own art studio, so she gave me like an easel and all the art. We'd go to the art store together, and she'd buy her supplies, and then she'd get me supplies as well. She never really pushed it on me. I just really wanted to do it. She was like, I wanted to make cartoons. So she was like, well, first you have to learn how to draw. So we would often go to the park or something with like little pads, and then we'd sketch like a tree or something like that. And then, so that was like the thing I did with my mom the most. Like I would draw with her, or, so I would draw something and then she kind of correct it. So like she would teach me how to see things like perspective, or if the sun was coming from this direction, create a shadow. And then the shadow would all be the same for all the different, just different rules about how physical light and shadow and perspective, and then physically how to like render that with a pencil or with a pen or with paint brushes. So like I remember we'd go to a movie and I'd be like I go to see Star Wars or something like that, or I would want to, or Superman or something. I'd want to draw what I saw. So I would go in my room and I would be drawing like Darth Vader, and then I would come into her studio and I'd show it to her and she'd critique it. And so she would like draw what I was trying to draw. It was really infuriating. Like I'd draw Darth Vader and it was horrible. Then she would draw it right next to my drawing, but perfect. And then she would show me what I was doing wrong. Then I would go back in my room, do it again, come back, and I would just go back and forth until it was good, until I like mastered that drawing. And so I think that was really like the beginning of it all for me. And then my mom and dad got a divorce, and we moved to Marin County to be with family when I was 5. So that was 1977.
With your mum's side?
It was just my mom.
Yeah.
So, my mom's side. Yeah, it was her. So my mom's mom, my grandmother, and my uncle and aunt, they lived in Marin County. Right. So we moved there. So we lived in this little town called Fairfax. And then my grandmother lived in San Anselmo. She lived like 2 miles away from George Lucas. So, and everyone around us were like employees of Lucasfilm or ILM. And so that was 5. And my Sunday school teacher was this guy named Chris Evans. And he was the map painting supervisor at Industrial Light and Magic. And he was working on, Star Wars. Not Star. He was working on Return of the Jedi, but he worked on, let's see, it was like Back to the Future, Willow, Dark Crystal, Gremlins, Batteries Not Included, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Like all these films that were in the 80s that I was like sort of obsessed with, Inner Space, he was working on. And then my neighbor,
Sunday school teacher.
I know. So I showed him my artwork, and at that time I was making cartoons. So I had made these flip books. So I kind of graduated from making drawings to flip books to little cartoons. So I had this box of like little yellow sticky pads, and my mom taught me how to make things move. So I was making little movies. They even had like editing. So it would be a shot to another shot and different perspective camera movements and things like that. They were kind of sophisticated. When I look at them now, I'm like, wow, that's pretty sophisticated for a little kid. But that was kind of how the door opened up. So then Chris was kind of like, why don't you come to ILM and I can show you what we're doing over there. And because he was a painter, I mean, his skill was really painting oil on glass or oil on canvas. I mean, he was like a traditional artist who was capable of creating a painting that looked indistinguishable from a photograph. Right. And that's what got him drafted right out of UCLA. Wow. Into ILM to do, and then he was taught how to be a map painter because the demand was so high.
Wow.
So I think, he was an artist. I was an artist. I really was hungry to learn, and I was obsessed with Star Wars. I mean, I was like crazy about Star Wars. That's all I would do is draw Star Wars and make cartoons of X-wing fighters and TIE fighters. And then one of my best friends in elementary school, his name is Jules Mann, and his dad was Jeff Mann, who was the head of the model department. So his dad was making X-wing fighters, and Y-wings, and TIE fighters, the Death Star. He was the head of the miniature department. Wow. At ILM. And I remember he had created a spaceship that wasn't in Star Wars, but it looked like the Star Wars style. And then it said Jules next on the like the name of the ship was Jules, and it had like blaster marks and stuff. And he would hang it in his room, and it was like, wow, your dad make Star Wars. Like he makes the spaceships in Star Wars. It was just like, that is the coolest thing ever. And then Jeff ended up running ILM. Years later, he was the main guy. So I had all these reasons to go to ILM, and all these people that would kind of let me come through there. And I was obsessed. I just wanted to learn. First, I wanted to learn how all the matte paintings were done. Then I wanted to know how the optical printer worked, how stop motion and go motion worked, and how the creature shop, they would make these like fully articulated creatures. Like for Return of the Jedi, they had all these creatures that they were making, and their eyes would blink. And I got to talk to Phil Tippett while he was making the Rancor, and he showed me how the Rancor puppet worked in its little lair, and I got to puppet it. I mean, it's like
cool.
Insane.
What a playground.
Yeah,
to have as a
and
kid.
that totally changed. I mean, it was like it was like I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker because, I knew it was possible. Like my mom made cartoons, and my Sunday school teacher made the matte paintings, and my friend's dad made the miniatures, and so it was like it was very realistic that I felt like, okay, I could, when I grow up, I can make movies. I can make a Star Wars movie.
You were not short on inspiration being in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I was just very, very fortunate. And also I was obsessed. So I would buy all the art of the Dark Crystal, or the art of Return of the Jedi, and these making of books, and I would just like pour over them and memorize them. And it still felt like, well, there's so much to learn, and it's very, I always knew it was like very competitive. But yeah, that was like a very fundamental in understanding like how these, because visual effects are like a combination between a magic trick and art. And that's actually movies in general. It's an illusion. It's all an illusion. Like the actors are pretending, and the writers are writing something that's not really happening. So like everything is an illusion to create something that's not real. But then the audience has to feel something. So yeah, I mean,
So what happened next? What happened after? What happened after the? So you're a kid. You're hanging out at Sunday school with all the Lucas crew, and able to have access to that and those people and that community. And what came after that? Did you go to school and study to do this? Did you just get an internship, or?
I got a video camera when I was 13, and up until 13 I was making flip books, and so it was like cartoons, and then it was like I would make storyboards for movies that I couldn't make. So I was like obsessed with getting a video camera. So I finally got a video camera, yeah, my dad and my mom split when I was a kid, and so I didn't talk to my dad. He's Japanese. He moved back to Japan. I didn't talk to him for years, and he had a new family and everything. And then he wanted to re-enter my life when I was like 13 years old, and we had moved to Santa Barbara. And he calls me up out of the blue, and he's like, "I want to be part of your life now." And so I said, "Okay, you can be part of my life on one condition. You buy me a video camera."
And, that's good leverage right there. I like it.
I don't know what, I was so obsessed with getting the video camera, and I would go to this Captain Video place every day after school to like ask them to hold the camera. They were so annoyed at me. They had like 5 different video cameras, and I would constantly come in. My mom didn't have any money, so I couldn't afford to get a camera, but I knew my dad could afford it. So we met at Captain Video, and then I came in there, and all the employees were, they just kind of rolled their eyes every time I'd come in there, because they knew I wasn't going to buy the video camera, but I would ask politely every time. So, but this time I actually went in and bought a video camera. I bought this it was like Video 8, the Sony Video 8 Pro, prosumer camera. And so I started making movies, And then George Lucas in 1988, George Lucas did a film festival, or maybe it was 1987. He had a youth film festival, and it was called Show Us the Future, and it was the first festival that he had done, and it was like children from 18 and under, and I was 15 years old, and I made a science fiction film called The Future's Future, and I shot it and edited it and submitted it, and I won the festival.
Wow.
And so I flew back to Marin County. The ceremony was at ILM. So now I'm back at ILM. I had been in Santa Barbara for a couple of years, and I went back to Marin, back to ILM, but this time, not as like a kid, but like as like a filmmaker. And it was really life-changing. They had taken the winners. It was like 5 winners, and they interviewed them. And I was like 15 years old. They ended up putting it on public television, national PBS, like my movie plus the interview with me. And that was crazy. I mean, that was like being anointed by George Lucas. So then I was like, okay, now I'm ready. And I ended up getting an art grant when I was 17. So it's like a couple of years later I got a $30,000 art grant to make my first feature film. And I dropped out of high school to direct this feature.
Wow.
So that was like, yeah.
A couple of years ago, let's say.
Yeah, well, I'm 50 now, so. But my mom was cool about it. I asked her. I was a junior in high school, and I said, "Can I drop out of high school to make this movie?" And she said, as long as she could do the makeup and hair, and wardrobe,
Cool.
then I could drop out of high school, and that's what I did. I dropped out of high school, made the feature film, and it wasn't a very good film, but I learned a lot from it. And just being able to make a feature film just from beginning to end and manage the money, and I had to hire and fire people. And it was like a very heady experience. And just like it was like very valuable for creatively, it was valuable, but more importantly, it was really important for me to be able to just mount a production and complete it from beginning to end.
So it was a full feature, like an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's an hour and a half film. It's based on Jean Paul Sartre's No Exit. So it was like, it was a play it was like this existential play that was, written in the 40s. And I had kind of become obsessed with it. And so I thought, I'll make that film. I'll make that play into a feature film, and I'll take place in hell, in this one room. And it was like 3 people are stuck in hell for eternity, and hell is other people. That's their torture, is that they'll just never get along. And that's kind of how I felt about high school. I hated it so much, and I just wanted to get out. So that was like a metaphor for my high school experience, was making this feature film.
And you literally did use it to get out.
Yeah.
So you did all this by the time you were 17 years old, and then what happened then? Did you actually have to go like to university, or what happened next?
Well, I remember I screened the film at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and it was not a very good movie, unfortunately. And I remember this woman and her daughter got up in the middle of the movie, and then they made a big fuss about it. And I was standing at the back of the theater, and they walked right by me, and the door opened up, and the light just filled. It was a daytime screening, and light just filled the screening room, and everyone turned back. And she told the usher, she goes, "That's the worst movie I've ever seen in my entire life." And she was standing right next to. She didn't know I was the director, and I literally fainted. I lost consciousness. I just like slid down on the floor, and I came to just a few minutes later, and I realized that I had spent, because it took me 2 years to make the movie, and so 2 years is a long time when you're a teenager, and I realized I worked this whole time and it was a movie that was like unreleasable and not good. And it was very painful because my first film had won this award from George Lucas, and I thought, oh, okay, I can do this, and I absolutely could not do it. And so I had to reassess and, okay, well, I got to do it. I got to figure out what to do now. Like, so I really wanted to go to film school because George Lucas had gone to USC, and Francis Coppola went to UCLA. I was obsessed with these directors, so I wanted to like pattern my life around these guys. So I wanted to do whatever they did, I wanted to do. And so, but my mother, although very supportive of me emotionally and intellectually, she's just always very supportive of me, was didn't have any money. So she was a secretary, and she's, you know, she when she divorced my dad and moved to Marin, she lost her animation career. So then she just became a secretary. So then it was like a secretary's salary supporting both of us. And I was a horrible student and I had dropped out of high school. So there was no way I could afford to go to college. My grades were horrible. I was just did not like school at all. But I really wanted to go to film school more than anything else. But I couldn't afford it. I didn't have the grades to do it. So I was 19. And so I moved to LA, and I got a job working at a video store, and lived on my friend's couch because I couldn't afford rent. And I would attend film school. So I would go to USC, and just because I was 19, I was 18 and 19 years old doing this, I would just attend USC classes, film classes. And I would go
to do that, or did you like break in?
Who showed up? Because I was young, so no one questioned me. So I would go to USC, I'd go to UCLA, and I'd go to Cal Arts, and I would go to as many film classes as possible. And I made friends with some of the students, so I'd hang out in their dorm rooms, and you know, I would not do the assignments because I wasn't enrolled.
You weren't a student, yeah.
Yeah, so I would just kind of like I guess they call it auditing, you know, but the teachers didn't know I would just kind of keep a low profile, and I would stay in the back and I would just take notes. And I did that for a couple of years. Wow. And yeah, and I just watched movies, and I would read books about. I made these little classes for myself. So like I'd get interested in a director like Martin Scorsese, and then I would watch every single movie that he directed in the order that he made them. And then I would go to the library, and I'd there was this thing called microfiche, where these magazines would be like on like film, and I get them printed out. So I would read all these articles like in American Film or Time or something, you know, like all these different magazines that they would do interviews with these directors where they would like promote the film, and they were talking about, you know, whatever that film was. So I'd watch the film, and then I'd read all these magazines, articles about the making of that film, or I'd find books about that film, or read interviews. I would just kind of obsess over that person's entire career. That would be like a month. Then I move on to like Robert Zemeckis, and I would just like watch all his movies in the order that he made them, and read all those articles about it. Go to get Starlog, back order Starlog magazines or whatever, and just kind of make my own curriculum.
Wow. So did you manage to actually like get onto a degree, or did you just basically you sat there through a degree and soaked up as much as you could, and then
I don't have a high school degree or a college degree.
Wow. Okay.
I have a junior high school diploma. I managed to get a junior high school, barely. Yeah.
Right. So then how did your filmmaking kind of take its what happened after that? So you've gone through some study, you'd had a bunch of very early experiences of making movies and getting to be around all these people.
Yeah.
What did you do after that?
So then my grandmother died, and I got an inheritance of about $20,000. And so I decided I would use that money to make a film. I had written a screenplay called Fagin's Children, And so I decided I would make a film. And again, I was like, throughout my early 20s, up to my mid 20s, I was mostly homeless. Like I would live on people's couches and things like that. And I would work minimum wage jobs, like working at video stores and working at theaters. I mean, where you can't actually make a living. But it would be like, I would find a job where I could just kind of pour myself into movies so that I would not deter my time. Like I didn't want to spend any time doing anything that wasn't making movies.
Yeah.
So it was like, I was this monk, you know? So I got this $20,000 and I spent almost the entire amount on film stock. Cause I was shooting on black and white 16 millimeter. So I'd go to Kodak and get all this film. And then I was shooting the film in Santa Barbara. So I had friends who were going to film school at Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara, which is like a cinematography school. And they had like Bolex 16 millimeter cameras, and they would have like Nagra sound machines, and they had editing facilities and lights and all this other stuff. And so I'd get these students. I convinced these film students to like take out equipment on the weekend for my movie. And because they were all working on like little assignments, but this was a feature film. So this is a screenplay that I wrote. And so it was like they're making a feature film. So it would benefit them to work on a feature film, and would benefit for me to get all the free equipment. So I cast all the actors from UCLA. So I was living in LA, and then I would shoot the movie in Santa Barbara. So on weekends, I'd shoot this on I'd shoot it in Santa Barbara during weekends. I get the actors to fly or drive to Santa Barbara, and they would like crash on friends' couches and stay in motels and things like that. And that took a couple years to make that film. And then that film didn't get distribution, but it was a good film. It was good enough to kind of get attention from Hollywood. Right. And so I ended up getting an agent and writing screenplays. So in my mid 20s, I was like writing screenplays. So I got to write a screenplay for John Carpenter. Like one of my first jobs was this job. It was a script that was written by Ray Bradbury in the 50s. I was hired to rewrite it and update it and work with Ray for John. So I would have these weekly meetings. So I'd write all week and then get notes from John Carpenter and Ray Bradbury. I was like 26 years old. Wow. I mean, it was like...
That must have been pretty cool.
It was incredible. And I was getting paid all this money. All of a sudden I was making good money. I mean, I've been sleeping on couches, renting people's... I had, for like 3 years, I was renting a kitchen pantry. I was living in a kitchen pantry.
Wow. You actually paid rent for the pantry.
Yeah, because it was only like $250. So it was a pantry. It wasn't anymore, but like I put a futon in it, and then the shelves were filled with like movies and books and things like that.
It didn't have food in it still.
No, it didn't have food in it. So I cleared the food out, and then it was a house of like 5 20-somethings. So it was like, hey, they all got to get paid less rent because I was in the pantry. And so I was only, so.
As American pantry, I guess, is probably bigger than a British. I'm thinking of British pantries as they're fairly small.
It was small. I can only put like a single, like a twin size futon. So it was like a coffin.
Right. So you're living in a pantry, but working on Hollywood movies.
Well, I was working on I was living in the pantry, and then all of a sudden I got the screenwriting job. I had met this producer. He liked my movie. He read one of my screenplays, because I was like writing I had written like 5 screenplays while like living in the pantry and like working at a movie theater and working at a video job for like $5 an hour. So it was just like this trade-off. I could be really poor, but then spend almost all my time like writing and studying film and getting good, mastering my craft. And then all of a sudden it hit, and I got screenwriting job after screenwriting job.
And then you moved out of the pantry, presumably.
Moved out of the pantry. Yeah, I got a nice place in downtown Santa Barbara.
Right. So that's kind of where it took off then, when you started by writing movies for people, but
Yeah,
you were also written a bunch of your own. Were you doing kind of both at the same time, making your own films and doing, because I've done a little bit of that, and sometimes it's tough when you're just kind of burning the candle at both ends like that. How did you
absolutely.
manage to like keep your own stuff going and
I just I just didn't have a life. I mean, I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't
Yeah.
have any hobbies or anything like that. I just sort of was like, everything was just movies, movies, movies. And then in 1999, I was able to raise some money and use some of my own money from the screenwriting jobs, and I was able to make a pilot, a television pilot. It was a sci-fi pilot called Tomorrow Never Knows, and that was the first time I worked in CG, and it was kind of like virtual production. It was the show was kind of like the Twilight Zone. So every episode, I only did one, but the idea was like it was a different future every week. So it was like, an anthology like the Twilight Zone.
That's cool.
But it was like a story from the future, from different futures. That the idea would be with different possible futures every week.
Wow.
So this was I put together a team of puppet makers. So I had these puppets, and the puppets were kind of like that British show called Captain Scarlet.
Okay. Yeah.
Jerry Anderson. It was like these puppets that were like had rods underneath them. I guess they were super marionation, so it was like marionettes. So this was like rods from beneath, and so they could blink and move their head and talk and everything, and it was all done in kind of a retro future style. So it looked like the early 1960s vision of the future, and it was in black and white. Really a weird little show. But we shot it we shot these puppets, live action puppets, in front of green screen, and then I created these CG backgrounds in 3D Studio Max and Bryce. I don't know if you remember.
I definitely do. Yeah.
Okay. So like 3D Studio Max,
water, mountains, and
that's right. Yeah. So we combined 3D Studio Max and Bryce, and I'm not what they call on the box. Like, I don't know how to actually create visual effects on a computer, but I know how it's all done, and I can direct visual effects artists. And for my training from my mom and Chris Evans, I know how to sort of push an artist, a CG artist, to get to photorealism, or to get to a level that maybe they couldn't do on their own. Because I've been trained to know what looks fake, and then how to push it into photorealism.
Right. Just don't ever tell them that it looks good. You just wait until the time's run out.
Well, there's all kinds of tricks to be able to work with a digital artist, because CG artists are not really taught about the limitations of photography. Like, for instance, like photography, there's a limit to, like, just for instance, like exposure. There's a limit to the kind of exposure. Like, if this is exposed, and then that wouldn't be exposed, or that would be crushed to black, or like in CG, you can kind of create any kind of exposure. There's no limit. Also, like black, like when things are really, really dark, our eyes, it's like camera and also eyes, like how our eyes see things. Like, the darker it is, the more saturation we don't see. Like, I remember Chris Evans was painting a matte painting for E.T., and he was painting this forest scene, and I looked at his palette, and his palette was just lots of variations of gray. So he's painting these trees, and they're all black and white, like variations of gray. And I asked him, like, what's going on? Like, trees are green, And he's like, well, at nighttime, trees are black and white. And so, like a lot of things like that, where he taught me about how we see things. So like if you create a CG forest at nighttime, sometimes the inclination is we'll make all the trees green without really knowing that and they're like, why does that look fake? And they won't know because they have a lot of times CG artists aren't taught about optics or how lenses work or how our eyes work. It's more like how the software works and how to make something really pretty. But making something pretty and making something that's real is two different things.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah. No, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because you've got these kind of two camps. You've got the filmmakers and the visual effects people, and for the longest time we've been really separate, and the visual effects people didn't really get to learn about filmmaking because you just at the end of the process executing on small pieces of the thing, as opposed to getting the whole thing necessarily. Maybe the VFX suits crossing into the other camp, but the filmmakers the other way around don't necessarily understand how the visual
yeah,
effects are getting done.
it's
But
really
right
sad.
now,
They keep them so separate. It's like it's
yeah,
very sad the way that big Hollywood movies work. Like the artists have no connection with the director.
that's why I think right now is a really exciting time, because we're in this new phase where it is possible to mix the two, and the visual effects artists are being kind of brought into that conversation because they happen in virtual production anyway, because it happens before the shoot. Now you have that opportunity
Right.
to inject those people into the early part of the process, which has not really happened before. So I think it's hopefully changing, and I think a lot of things are being shaken up.
Oh yeah, I think that's the best part of it. And also, you've got smaller crews, and
Yeah,
the only reason why the filmmakers and the CG visual effects people are sort of separated is because there's like 100 of them. And so there's all these hierarchies where you got like a lead and a supervisor and the supervisor who supervises and all of this kind of stuff. So because you have to do it that way because there's so many hundreds of people involved. But what's great about virtual production is that you can limit those crews, and they can be small groups of artists who are doing a lot. And I know that sounds like, oh no, less people employed, but I do think that there's the opportunity, instead of just having like 3 Marvel movies, but like hundreds and hundreds of smaller projects with smaller crews, all telling all kinds of variations of stories. Because I think that's what we really need. We need more interesting projects instead of just like a couple tent poles where there's like no creativity. There's just driving deadlines and crushing spirits. I mean, like nobody wins with these giant movies because even the filmmakers aren't winning because they're not really even directed by anybody. These giant like Marvel movies, there's no director. The directors come in and they're being told what to do by executives, and it's already been previs by a group of people a year before, and you know what I mean. Like there's no vision anymore. It's just like this. Everyone's just a cog in this gigantic machine. These like $200 million movies.
so it seems like it's ripe for, because the access is now some of the best it's ever been to filmmaking equipment and visual effects tools, for somebody or some people to kind of disrupt this and start telling their own stories. Like you've been explaining how at the beginning of your journey, you fought to get access to rudimentary filmmaking equipment. At this point in time, that same kind of budget
Yeah,
gets you access to a
it's amazing.
camera, a
Yeah,
machine. The software's kind of all free
yeah.
to a great
And it
extent.
was like young filmmakers really like today. They don't know like what we went through to get just even film. I mean, I was spending so much of my precious money, on film stock, and then I could only do like 1 or 2 takes because I'd run out of film. I mean, film was like $100 a minute. That's how
Right.
long. $100, another $100. You don't use every second in film, so you're just throwing away hundreds of dollars. So now it's like free. You can get a camera pretty easily, and then it's just on a little card, and then CG. I mean, with virtual production, Unreal Engine. I mean, when I was doing in 1999, I was doing this pilot, and we were working with Bryce and 3D Studio Max, and it would take days to render a shot.
Yeah.
And it was and if I didn't like the shot, we'd have to do it all over again. Days would go by, and it's like tedious. So even early visual effects was tedious, and then the machines were really expensive. Like $1 million for like one of these Silicon Graphics workstations. Like Silicon Graphics. I was living in Santa Barbara. And that was Wavefront. It was right there downtown Santa Barbara, and that's where they had these computers. And it was like I just knew certain people. I mean, it's kind of weird. Like I just happened to go to Marin for that. Then in Santa Barbara with the Silicon Graphics. I mean, like I just happened to be in these places, and it's like the doors just kind of open. So I was able to kind of learn things and have access to things. And it was very difficult back then. But now it is, you don't really need to be like just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. Like, Unreal Engine's free. You just download it. It's like it can do everything that Jurassic Park, you can make Jurassic Park on a regular computer now, with Unreal Engine, and it could look even better than Jurassic Park if you're good. If you're a good enough artist, that's right. The thing.
So what would you say to somebody now, like who's a kid or at the beginning of their filmmaking journey, at least, given that the environment now is completely different? They may not necessarily have to live in a pantry to push themselves forward. What would you do if you had all of these things that we've got now back then?
Yeah, geez, that's a good question. I don't, my little private film school that I went to, when I was like, I would watch all of Martin Scorsese's movies in the order that he made them. And I would cross-reference all of the, I would just obsess about the history of film and understand the language of cinema. And all of that was actually the most valuable thing I could have done for my career in Hollywood. Because people who are really successful in this business, they have that knowledge. They have this crazy encyclopedic knowledge of film history and film grammar that really you need to dedicate yourself. I mean, right now you don't need to go to the library, because I was going to the library and getting old magazines and microfiche and everything. Now you get the internet. All that stuff's available.
That was the internet back then.
Right, exactly. That was the internet, the library. But so the information is there, readily available, even more than ever. But you have to have a discipline and an obsession. It's not really discipline. People go, "You're so disciplined." I'm just obsessed. I mean, I have a compulsion. It's like a weird retardation. Like I'm not normal. Like I'm obsessed even now. I'm obsessed with film and film history and understanding. I just feel like there's so much to learn. I've been at this my whole life. I feel like I'm just starting to figure it out. There's so much more to learn. But my point is that the door to Hollywood was because of the knowledge that I achieved from those obsessive studyings. Like, for instance, I ran into this is like, I was like 20 years old or 19 or 20 years old, and I ran into Robert Zemeckis. He was in a doctor's office, and he was sitting there with his wife, and I didn't know why they were in the doctor's office, so I didn't want to be rude. But like, he got up and went into the doctor's office, and I was in the waiting room, and his wife was there, and I walked up to his wife, and I was like, "Oh my God, your husband is like my hero. I love him so much." And she said, "Well, what do you like about him?" And I was like, "Well, his student film at USC, Field of Honor, is like the best student film ever. And then I Want to Hold Your Hand, his first feature film about the Beatles, is super duper fucking great. And then I Loved Used Cars, his second film. And then he wrote 1941 for Steven Spielberg. And then he did Back to the Future. He did Romance in the Stone, Death Becomes Her. Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Like I listed all his movies in the order that he made them, even the movies that he just wrote and didn't direct. And I knew his collaborators, and I knew all of the studios that, and this is before I had a smartphone where I could just IMDb it. It was just all up here. And so I was able to just recall all of it and then deliver it with such passion and love to his wife. And so then she said, well, Bob would love to meet you. Why don't you come over to the house? Wow. So we then arranged for a meeting for me to go over to his house. And so I got there, and there was like a housekeeper. They live in this gigantic, epic mansion in Montecito. And that I guess the Back to the Future franchise paid for or something. But I mean, he's got so many huge films. And so they said, well, you've got 5 minutes, right? And so I'm sitting there in his living room, and he comes in, and I said, I've got some questions for you. I had this pad of all these like 20 questions. So I sat down with him, and I was like, why do you have lightning in all your movies? And he said, well, I don't have lightning in all my movies. And I was like, yes, you do. Every single one of your movies. In fact, Back to the Future, it's the thing that sends him back to the future, is lightning. And he's like, you're right, I have lightning in all my movies. I didn't know that. And then an hour later, we were like still hanging out and talking. And I was able to really hang out with him and ask him all the questions I wanted to. And he really opened his life to me. And it was because I had all of this knowledge about his career and about just filmmaking in general, that he opened. There was like this, I could almost hear like a key going into a big lock, and clunk, and opening and then walking in. And I've had so many of those experiences, and it really has to do with like my passion and my knowledge and my obsession and my dedication to the art form of filmmaking, and in all of its attributes. I mean, I'm just as passionate about acting and writing and directing as I am with visual effects and music and composition and even the mechanics and of the business and the distribution and finance. Like, it's all really fascinating to me, and I know the history of it. And because of that, when I do talk to people who are like on another level, they kind of I'm reaching up to them, and they reach down to me and they bring me up. And I think if that's the biggest bit of advice I can give any young filmmaker, is just like, have the respect for the business to understand what it is exactly that you want to join. It is joining a community with a history, and there are factions and tribes. And when you enter the business, whoever you are, if you are a visual effects person, you should know who Douglas Trumbull is. You should know why he's important. You should understand who these people are, and then who their mentors were. Like Ray Harryhausen has a lineage with someone like Phil Tippett. He is Ray Harryhausen of today. And then there's going to be someone who is Phil's replacement when he's ready to go. It's like there is a living, breathing lineage and a kind of a continuum. And if you want to enter it, you got to know where you belong. Like, you belong to a tribe, and you need to know who your tribe is. And then how do you
find where you belong?
I think now it's like social media is like the new town square. I mean, if you're in LA, you can like go to the Writers Guild, or you can go to the Directors Guild. They have events and things like that. I mean, LA is like, I don't live in LA anymore, but I go on the regular, and there's a community, there's events, and but online, you can friend someone on Facebook, or Instagram, and then they start to follow you, and you can but it's like a secret handshake, you know. It's like understanding why that person's important, what they contributed, who their mentors were, and then you literally ask for mentorship. I mean, I've asked for mentorship from Bob Zemeckis. You know, I asked for mentorship from George Lucas. I asked for mentorship from Francis Coppola. And there are certain people who've been gracious enough to give me mentorship. And sometimes it's, as you know, Chris Evans got me a job. My first job in Hollywood was Digital Domain as a production assistant. He gave me that job, but I earned it. You know, I earned it from like thousands of hours of making flip books and drawing and making films and wanting to learn from him and the rest of the guys at ILM, you know, so that I would be worthy of a referral.
What's a fascinating history of yourself and the film industry, and I think that some great insights to take from that is to know your history, study your history, understand the playing field, learn the fundamentals, learn about who makes it and how they make it, and study it. And the tools I think are transient, but those principles are kind of timeless. So it makes a lot of sense. Now we're in this. Yeah, go ahead.
What about you? I mean, you hold a very important position in the history of filmmaking, virtual production, and that transition from, you know, normal visual effects to what is now violently game engine it's like a violent change. It's not a little change. It's a massively violent change that's very disruptive. I mean, didn't you have mentorship from people who were above you that you somehow impressed or connected with, and then you were able to learn from, and vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I bought the Making of Jurassic Park book when I was 14, I think, and obsessed over it. I was, different. I was in South London. I was 14. I had no work permit, no skills. There was absolutely no chance I was going to go get to work. I applied about 8 times, I think. Eventually, 20 something years later, I got to go work at ILM. But it was a long process of continuing, like with the obsession, as you said. You don't need discipline if you're obsessed. It's just you're just going to do it anyway. So I kept doing it, and I didn't let go of the vision. And I was lucky at some points, and I felt unlucky at others. But yeah, Jungle Book was really a really lucky moment where I happened to be at Digital Domain, and was presented with this opportunity, and most people actually turned it down because they thought that it was a fad and it was going to go away, and like, using game engines to make movies, this is not a real thing, this isn't visual effects, this is like some weird previs that's going to disappear. And I was really lucky to be there at that moment, and I still had to fight to get it. I remember having to be persistent with the recruiter and keep going. I kept going up to the door every day saying, like, do you hear anything yet? No, I wanted to do it because it sounded really exciting and interesting, and I got to go do that, and it was a great moment, because at that point nobody really was thinking about that. Nobody knew about it. It took years actually for it to kind of catch on and become known about publicly, and at this point in time is rampantly taking off. So I'm very glad that I had that kind of luck and insight, but it did build on top of a lot of hard work and sacrifices. And I didn't ever live in a pantry, I don't think, but the equivalent of that, where I remember when I was younger saying to my friends, I'm not going to see you for a year. I'm just going to get my head down. I'm going to work on this thing. I'm going to change my life this year, and I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to go do all that stuff. I'll come back to it, I'm sure, and I did. But yeah, just being understanding that you've got something that's worth chasing after makes life worth living, I think. And if you're lucky enough to have had that insight, which I think comes about through experimentation, mostly trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what resonates with you. Yeah, I felt very lucky to have been in that position, be able to do that. Yeah. So, but this is Yeah, no problem if your camera's dropped, but we can still keep chatting anyway because it's largely an audio podcast, so we'll just keep going. So I want to ask you a little bit about your journey into virtual production, because you have embraced this wholeheartedly and made some movies using it.
I'm sorry.
What piqued your interest in this new way of making movies? Was it something that you kind of saw coming because of your own curiosity? Was this event? What
I did not see it coming at all.
Right.
It was my business partner, Joan Webb, was the one who introduced it to me. I was aware of the Unreal Engine. I did not think it was a cinematic tool worth pursuing, but because it looked like a video game, and so I had never seen it look photorealistic. So it was just something that was interesting, and I thought maybe eventually we'll get there. But she kept persistently telling me about it and saying that this was something that I should look at. There was a demo about three and a half years ago, maybe, that that was in Burbank, and it was an LED volume with the Unreal Engine, and it was something you could sign up and just go and take a look at. So she said, you got to come over there, you got to look at it. And so I went down there, not really thinking of, just sort of like, because she told me to. So I said, okay, Joan, I'll do it for you. So I go there. My dad was visiting from Japan. It was like a mile away from my house in Burbank. And so my dad and I just walked there. And I walked in there, and they gave me the camera. And I asked my dad to stand on this mark in front of the volume, and I moved the camera, and it had parallax. The environment did not look photoreal, but it was a little out of focus.
Mm-hmm.
And the depth of it and that real-time parallax was something that I'll never forget. I mean, it knocked my socks off.
Right.
And it was the coolest magic trick I'd ever seen. And I had just been hired to direct this movie called Gods of Mars. Right. And it was not fully financed, but there was some money, enough to hire me and my production designer and to do some development work. So I had hired Fawn Davis, who was a miniature maker at ILM for episodes 1, 2, and 3. He worked on the Star Wars prequels.
Yeah.
And he did a lot of miniatures for that show. And I wanted to do miniatures. I really, really love old style visual effects. Practical.
Yeah.
Matte paintings, miniatures, animatronic creatures, practical stuff. I love CGI too, but I love the kind of imperfection that miniatures have. And a lot of the stuff, just that old style visual effects, to me, sometimes it just looks better. Yeah. And so, but a lot of those techniques are impossible to create nowadays, because literally those artists don't even exist anymore. They've retired. There's no pipeline to employ. And right. So,
schools aren't teaching it. Studios don't have that work for people to learn from. Yeah, it makes sense.
So, like, the last studio that does miniatures is Fawnco. It's Fawn Davis's studio in LA. So I was able to hire Fawn to do some development on the movie. And the idea that I was going to do is I was going to shoot the entire movie with green screen and trackers for camera tracking. And then I was going to have Fawn and his team build the entire Martian landscape, and all of the interiors and exteriors would be miniatures.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I was just going to composite it like I did with my little 1999 television pilot. And so that was that was what my plan was. And so
And then you went to the demo
I
in
went to the
Burbank.
demo and
You're
I was
like,
like, wait a second.
okay,
So then I talked to the guy there and I said, um, I I think what would be really good is to scan miniatures and then put them in the Unreal Engine.
right.
And I asked the guy, is that possible? And he goes, I guess it's possible. And so I thought, well, maybe that'll make it look more realistic. And so Epic, so then Joan told me, hey, there's a Unreal, the mega grant from Epic. You should apply to that. So I wrote a grant and I applied and I got it. And and the grant was to create all of the stuff that I wanted in the film is miniatures first, and then scan them, and then put them in the Unreal Engine and see if that helped. Because the Quixel mega scans look absolutely flawless in the Unreal Engine. That was something that I felt like really, really was like a huge breakthrough for.
But they haven't sent their guys to Mars yet, so
So I figured, okay, well, a lot of the
the
Martian
Mars
landscape
collection.
could be done that way, but then all the spaceships I thought could be done with miniatures. So so we ended up getting that grant, and then we were put the movie kind of on hold and just do R&D. And so we did that, and then COVID hit, and so it was sort of like forced into R&D anyway. So we spent like a year and a half just figuring out that pipeline. And additionally, we were able to hire a former Industrial Light and Magic matte painter, Jet Green, who was working there when I was a kid. When I'd go there as like 10 years old, she was there. I met her. And now I was able to hire her and do matte paintings. And then we would put the matte paintings in 3D space in the Unreal
In the
Engine.
engine.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I felt like the Unreal Engine sky was not very realistic. And the clouds and the whole like ultra dynamic sky, it's got some cool things to it, but it's like the clouds are moving and you can't get them to go back to where you wanted them to be. They're just sort of like, it's like painting with like watercolor. It's like, it just does, you put the watercolor brush and it just starts to go, right? And you can't control it, So I thought, I would like a cloud right there, and I'd like it to be exactly that way and not move around, and then I wanted like layers of clouds. And so we started making clouds as matte paintings, and then by moving the camera around, it would create this nice little parallax. And so we were working on like trying to make the Unreal Engine look as photoreal as possible. And then by utilizing old style visual effects like matte paintings and miniatures. And it took us a while to do it, but we ended up figuring out a way that I'm really happy with now.
How did you do the scanning?
We did every single kind of scanning you can think of to try to figure out what was the best, way. We were able to get, Joan actually was able to reach out to Arctec, and we got like a $500,000 scanner. I mean, it was like this incredibly expensive piece of machinery that was given to us as a sponsor. We were able to get like $3-4 million worth of equipment from various sponsors. She was able to secure these great, these sponsors like Lenovo and I wish I had a list of all the brands that we had. Anyway, I'm embarrassed. I forgot, but it's like a dozen companies that gave us like all this great gear.
You could send us the links afterwards. We can post them.
Okay. Yeah. So it was wonderful. I mean, we were able to really get, and then we were able to get another mega grant. And really it was because we were venturing into new territory, and a lot of these companies would like to establish themselves as the companies of record that could pull off, virtual production, because we're still, it's still a big petri dish. I mean, we're still trying to figure out what is, how to do this. I mean, one of the things I left out of my little journey is that I became a visual effects supervisor in the early 2000s, and I worked on a couple sci-fi channel movies. This one of them is Lava Lantula, where I had to create like hundreds of giant spiders, fire-breathing spiders, and I learned a lot about the whole pipeline. And I was taking a lot that I learned from Digital Domain and ILM to do like a virtual production company where people were working from home, and I had a team that were in the hundreds of artists that were working in Maya and Nuke, and collaborating all from home, which at that time had not been done because of security reasons.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's impossible. That's what they said. It'll never be done. And then in the space of 1 week, they found it was possible.
Yeah, it was something that that had never been done before. Wired magazine did a story about us, and how we had 300 artists from 50 countries, and now everything's done that way. But I was never able to really be a visual effects supervisor at a big company like you. I never really understood. I mean, my experience was sort of like as a child, but as an adult, I never worked at ILM or, at Digital Domain. I was like a production assistant in my early 20s. So like I was kind of creating my own company and figuring out how to do it just by hook or by crook, and so I think, but the advantage that we had was that we were all remote, and which was a disadvantage. So that meant I was never going to work on like a Disney movie or something like that. So it was like little sci-fi channel movies. They're not so concerned with like security and things like that. So sharing files over the internet was not a big deal. But the process of doing Gods of Mars, I had to, I had like 10 years of visual effects training of like what each software program did and how they all work together. There's like the modeling people, and then there's the texturing people, and there's the shading people, and there's the rigging people, and the animation people, and then the comping people, and there's an order to all of that. And there's a structure that the whole industry works in, and I learned that whole process. And then I had to abandon that entire process while we were working on Gods of Mars, because we were working with the Unreal Engine. And so like, I had to throw away like everything that I had learned, and working with these new artists, these game engine artists who had only done video games, and then combining their skills and ability with established VFX people. It was like we were all at the bottom. We all had to it was very humbling, because we all had to learn from the very, very, very beginning.
Yeah, no, it's been a great leveler. It's leveled the playing field to a great extent. I think there's so many people that have been in the industry for a really long time that now all of a sudden don't know everything, and it's good because it's making everybody go back to school, which is great. And it's
absolutely
fascinating.
So Joan has just texted me: Cook Optics, Blackmagic Design, Asus, Nvidia, Wacom, Strategy, CT, Creative Technology, Lenovo. There's more too, but anyway, ironically,
you have it in real time.
But I guess I just really love having to figure stuff out where no one has figured it out before. So there's like no roadmap, and I think it. What I'm really excited about is like being able to democratize the workflow, because like Maya, when I first started working with Maya, or artists that had Maya was like $20,000.
As you said, the machine that you had to run it on was a few $100,000, and
right.
how are you going
And
to learn it? Because you can't learn it unless you're in a facility that's
yeah.
has
And
those things.
so that there's this barriers to entry, and it's like, um, as a director and as a storyteller, I want to tell stories that I'm really interested in science fiction and fantasy. And so I want to tell stories that are really fantastical, but like, I don't have the budget for that because most of the time I'm like self-financing my projects. And so, I don't live in a kitchen pantry anymore, but I don't have like millions of dollars. And so what's so exciting for me now is that I'm able to do something like a Gods of Mars, or I'm just now finishing a feature film called The Tarot, which I have been making for 5 years, and I've been self-financing it. And just as I can afford to shoot another scene, kind of thing, on weekends. And there was a bunch of scenes that I was able to accomplish, like 150 shots, all done in the Unreal Engine, that I really could not afford. So they were just sitting on a shelf, like gathering dust until all of this started happening. And so what's exciting for me is, as a storyteller, now I can tell the stories I want to tell without having to raise millions of dollars. But also there's this whole generation of young filmmakers who also are living in kitchen pantries, who want to tell stories that are big and, huge sci-fi fantasy movies, or epic stories like Lawrence of Arabia or something like that. And now they can tell these stories. Like a low budget movie doesn't have to look like Clerks anymore.
Right. So you already gave a couple pieces of advice to those people, like learn your fundamentals, go study your history, learn the foundational principles of filmmaking. Um, what what else would you tell people, or what are you excited about doing next?
Well, the tarot is really what I'm excited. That's my main project right now. I'm just doing the sound mix on it right now, and that's um, uh, a supernatural thriller that I wrote and directed, and I'm very excited about that film. And so, um, and there's a lot of other projects that are kind of in the wind right now that I'm excited about working on. But I'm also really excited about helping virtual production get on its feet. And
Yeah.
so, like, right now, there's 13 LED volumes in LA, and they're almost all dark, meaning they're just sitting there. People have invested millions of dollars. They're sitting and waiting. They're expensive to rent, and there's not enough people who know actually how to accomplish virtual production to rent those stages and make something. So, like, the industry itself doesn't quite understand what's possible. Like, there's some misconceptions, like virtual production can be much, much cheaper than traditional production. And I think that that's a misunderstanding. A lot of people think it's more expensive because The Mandalorian has made it famous, has made virtual production famous, and The Mandalorian is the most expensive television show in the history of TV. So they just assume
Yeah.
virtual production is expensive, and people know, oh, these LED walls are millions of dollars. So, but that's not the only kind of virtual production that can be. You don't need an LED volume to do virtual production. And so I think that there's the industry, and the mainstream Hollywood industry needs education. So that's what's so great about what you guys are doing. It's so important that the industry have an education, understand how virtual production is done, how you can save money, how you can execute on it. And then there's the whole world of independent filmmaking that is going to really change independent filmmaking in the most fundamental, dramatic way that it's ever been. This is the biggest change since the advent of color or sound or something like that. I mean, it's this way even bigger than that.
Yeah, it's really cool to see what people are doing and especially, as you said, from the indie perspective. We had a recent student who did our course, our flagship course, Unreal for Filmmakers, and he used that to make a pitch for the movie he wanted to make, and then went out and did a Kickstarter. Byron Chow is a very talented young man. He went out and did a Kickstarter, raised about 25 grand, and then made his movie and used a smaller LED, actually used an LED volume and used a smaller one that was more affordable in LA. And yeah, some great results. You know, we can share the links to it, and hopefully we'll be doing a feature on it soon, because I think it's a fine example of exactly what you're saying. The fact that independent filmmakers can use this stuff. It's not just the domain of large budget big features. If you're smart with it and if you understand it, and yeah, it's an exciting time.
It
Well,
really is.
so I wanted to ask you, before we wrap, is there anything that you'd like to share with people? Do you have any links or website or anything that you'd love to people to follow you on or know about that you're doing?
Well, our company's called Ronin Film, RONINFILM.com. And there's a lot of examples of what we're doing there. We've got some tutorials on, how we were able to accomplish certain shots. That are on this. If you go to the website, go to the VFX breakdowns. You can see how we were able to accomplish certain shots using the Unreal Engine. And then, I think my camera's back up again. Aha!
There you go.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you and see you now.
Okay. Yeah, we've made a bunch of these tutorials. I mean, they're not really tutorials, but they're sort of behind the scenes so that you can see how the shots are accomplished, sort of intuitively. Yeah, and then the tarot will be done in a couple months, and then I'm going to be hopefully releasing it in theaters independently.
Oh, cool.
Which is like COVID kind of shut down. A couple things happened during COVID. Movies stopped being made for the theaters. And so there's like a small amount of, I mean, this is kind of part of what I think is so exciting about this time in filmmaking history, which is all the theater chains were booked up with studio movies as far as we're alive. And every Friday, there would be 5 to 6 movies since the birth of us. Every Friday, there's been 5 to 6 new movies every Friday. And now there's an average of like 2. And so theaters for the first time are like accepting independents to make a deal directly with them, completely sidestepping distribution or exhibitors.
Very cool.
Or distribution companies and going directly to theaters. So it's now possible to go ahead and like release a movie independently. You couldn't do that before. So that's exciting. And then making a movie that looks like a huge epic movie for a very low amount of money. I mean, these cameras are really super cheap. You can edit on your computer. You can now do all kinds of amazing things with the Unreal Engine. All this stuff is like free or cheap. I mean, there's like Blender and there's all these things that you can do as a filmmaker to achieve like spectacle, like really breathtaking spectacle that was really reserved for multi-million-dollar movies. And so this is the moment in film history where that kind of spectacle that was reserved for only James Cameron and on $200 million budgets, we're about to see a fundamental shift where some kid out there is going to be able to make a movie that looks better than Avatar and spent $20. And that's going to radically change. It'll be like movies before that and then movies after. It's like AD and BC kind of thing.
So yeah, your advice earlier on rings true. At the end here, where you're talking about learning storytelling, basically, because if everybody has access to the tools, then the thing that stands out is the story, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the story is everything. Amazing images are really there to just support. And I guess, like, it used to be that, when you were coming up in visual effects, it was like you would be lucky if you could just be a very important cog in a gigantic wheel, in a machine, right? You could be an artist, but you could just do one little piece. You couldn't like tell a story. You would be there to just do one little piece of the story. And now it's possible to have much more of a contribution to the overall story. You could really just not just do animation or just do a comp, or it doesn't have to be all compartmentalized. That like you could really be a full artist and do, the entire film really yourself, or with a small group of people, and do something like The Lion King or Jungle Book, just with a group of friends, right, in your dorm room or something like that, and it would be as good. We're now on that. It's gonna happen.
Exciting times. I'm with you on that one. Yeah, very, very exciting time to be alive, and no shortcuts in terms of creative and learning how to tell good stories and be a good artist.
And it's still
develop the eye.
artistry. Exactly. It's still artistry and storytelling at the end of the day. These are things that are free, but time is money. It does take 1,000 hours to master these things. It just doesn't happen overnight. You have to dedicate yourself and learn artistry.
You've given away a lot of tips today, and talking about how you got access to that lineage and got access to those people, and really I think that's what we're all aiming for. You can read books about it. That's the best access I had in South London as a kid, but I've caught up a little bit later on. But yeah,
trying to get. I mean, you absolutely did it. I mean, you broke through, and now you're on the other side. Now you're teaching it.
Yeah, it's a great privilege to be able to do that and be able to help facilitate those experiences, and yeah, hopefully we'll get to help virtual production get on its feet as well, and be able to, there's a lot of demand for it, a lot of people who are wanting to learn it. There's lots of opportunity. People are constantly telling us they need Unreal Engine artists and virtual production artists. So there seems like there is all the studios that we speak to, there's a ton of demand out there. So it's good, really good.
We're kind of there's one sort of downside, and I'm trying to figure out how this is going to work. But we have these huge institutions like ILM and Digital Domain, right? And these institutions are the ones that are making the big movies, right? And there's a real resistance to moving over to a game engine. And it's like they've invested millions of dollars in a pipeline, and also in investing in people who know this Maya nuke pipeline. Like there's a whole structure to how it's made. It's like it's making little sandwiches. You're comping everything. Really, at the end of the day, you're compositing things in a very specific way. I mean, the Unreal Engine is like the way you create images. It is CGI, but it's really like so different the way you achieve these shots. I mean, I had to really stop everything and relearn everything. It took me like 2 years to just get to a place where I could actually achieve professional quality on a deadline now. And when I talk to people who are working at ILM or Digital Domain, they don't want to just not take work for 2 years and just retrain hundreds of people and go, stop what you're doing. Like, we're not going to take the new Transformers movie, because we need to all stop and now learn Unreal Engine and learn this other technique, that's really very, very different. And so it's like, I don't really see these big, huge institutions going ahead and just changing overnight. Like there's a lot of pushback, I mean, I think smaller studios like Ronin Film were able to pivot and change everything. But like, I think the independent movement, if independents are small, they'll change on a heartbeat,
Yeah, I think that's what's been at. And we're seeing friends from those big institutions split off and start to create their own small studios entirely based in Unreal Engine, not using a little bit of the old guard, but really embracing it its full potential, dealing with a few of the limitations it's still working through, but really going for it. And I think it's going to be those it's going to be the rebels. They're the ones who are going to do it.
The Rebel Alliance.
It's always the rebels.
I hope that the mainstream does embrace it, and it's going to take some time, and I understand. I mean, I feel for those guys. I mean, it's like, how can you just disassemble the entire machine, while it's making money? I mean, I understand, but it's like, it's so it's incredibly wasteful. I would spend like a week rendering a shot, in the old method, and now I can just do it in real time. And that week I can make 100 different variations. It's like, there's a better way, guys.
Yeah. Well, I think that offline visual effects still has just the edge visually. As long as you can deal with the limitations, there's huge advantages to doing it in virtual production, and that edge is not going to exist for too much longer, I don't think, with the advent of things like Unreal 5 with its massive amounts of geometry and real-time dynamic lighting and stuff, huge advances like that happening so frequently. You can just see where it's
just
going.
In the last month with Unreal 5.1, I mean, it's like Lumen is way better than any kind of ray tracing I've ever seen on the other end of professional VFX. I mean, it's just better, and it's free. And it's in real time. Like, what? It just blows my mind.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible time, and really exciting to be a part of it, for sure. Somebody asked, as we wrap here, somebody asked a question: when are you making the movie of your life?
Steven Spielberg's movie of his life. It's called The Fabelmans. It's so good. You should go check it out. It's so great. Maybe when I'm 80, like Spielberg is, maybe I'll do something like that. I feel like I'm just starting, so I don't know. But that's nice. That's very flattering.
Good way to be. And somebody else asked the question: what is the best indie 3D scanner you would recommend?
I think that your iPhone has a LiDAR scanner on it, and that I think that is incredibly efficient, and just scanning with using your iPhone is a really, really great way of doing photogrammetry.
Awesome. Yeah, even that end of creation is in everybody's pocket. So yeah, very exciting time. Well, it feels like we could do another few episodes. So hopefully we'll get to have you back on.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for including me. I love this podcast. I mean, I watch it regularly, and I think it's so great. It's so important to get the message out, and to really, this is kind of creating community that we really do need.
Yeah, that's how it's done. I remember that from the Light and Magic TV series, which I'm still struggling to finish, just because I don't have enough time.
I'm in tears watching it. It's so good.
Yeah, well, there's probably bits of you were probably in some of the shots. Yeah, that kind of rings true for this point in time. It's the community is what drove it at that point in time, and it still is, and it's great to be a part of it. And we're huge on community here at CG Pro, so it's great to have you as a part of the community, and to be part of yours. And I'm very, as I said, very grateful for you taking time out of your evening to share your really fascinating story with us, and all of the wisdom and insights that you've shared with everybody tonight. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you also to our listeners. There's still some of you listening at this point, and we've had a great session. Thank you guys all for being a part of it, and I look forward to seeing you or seeing your questions again in a couple of weeks on our next episode. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of your evening. You can follow us again at becomecgpro.com or in our Facebook group. And thanks for being a part tonight.